We thank God for our music ministry, and we look forward to their presentation this afternoon. It's hot, and so forgive me, but and I got on my regalia today. For all the folks who graduated, I wanted to represent, you understand? But it's hot. You all don't mind if I take this academic robe off and at least take the hood off. That's a little better. I want to call your attention to this 9th chapter of the Gospel of Mark again. We've read the text for today. Let me read it again so that I may have footing. Mark chapter 9, beginning with verse 2. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my Son, my beloved, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. I want to center on this 5th verse, if I can. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings." The translation, King James Version, "Let us build 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Well, since this is Graduates Recognition Day, I want to begin with a historical story. 1926, Vernon Johns, who was the pastor of the Court Street Colored Church in Virginia, submitted a sermon to the national journal called The Year's Best Sermons. As it did every year, this volume was used to collect and produce the best sermons, publish them across the nation. Johns had always thought that this annual volume was missing something because there never were any black preachers there. And he felt like the genius of black preaching was missing. So for a few years, Johns took upon himself to educate the nation in that magazine by submitting the sermon of Negro preachers, including Mordecai Johnson from Morehouse College and others. Each year, John's submissions were rejected by the review board. The legend has it that Johns, who had a temper, became fed up with all those rejections. He took one of those rejection letters, turned it over, and started to write a sermon entitled Transfigured Moments from Matthew's version of this. In 1926, he was the first Negro to have a sermon published in that national magazine. His sermon was a masterpiece in every way. He demonstrated everything that a sermon ought to be It was clear in its focus, rich in its metaphors, deep in its biblical knowledge, and a plain vision that calls humanity to do better. You may recognize the name of Vernon Johns. He was the pastor at the Dexter Street Church in Montgomery that they fired. You see, that Montgomery church was filled with people who didn't want to make any waves, and they were doing pretty well in the segregated South. And one day, Vernon Johns put out on the marquee the sermon for the next Sunday. It was his response to the endless cycle of black people dying at the hands of lynchers and on their ropes. And so his sermon was entitled that Sunday, and he put it out in the middle of the week. It is legal to lynch Negroes in Alabama. The people of Dexter Street Church threw him out, and they decided that they needed a less threatening pastor. So they called a young PhD graduate from Boston University by the name of Martin Luther King Jr. And the rest is history. Any preacher worth his or her salt when discussing this text of Mark or the conversation of the transfiguration of Jesus, where Jesus is up on Mount Hermon with these three disciples, and suddenly they are joined by two other figures, Moses representing the law, Elijah representing the prophets, and the law and the prophets and Jesus are talking together. These three disciples that Jesus took up there could not have heard what was said, but in the front of their eyes, Jesus' robe was transformed. It was whiter than anything that OxyClean and Clorox could do together. It was so bright that he kind of gravitated upward, and there Elijah and Moses talking to him, and Peter in that moment says, "It is good for us to be here. Let's build 3 tabernacles." Well, any preacher worth their salt while reading this, if you know anything about the history of preaching in this country, you have to read Vernon John's sermon. And I did. And then I had to call a friend of mine on an emergency call last week. I called my good friend Frank Thomas, whom you know. I said, "Man, I need your help." I said, "I'm working on a sermon on the transfiguration of Christ, and I need you to talk me out of reading Vernon John's sermon word for word." Well, I'm grateful that he talked about transfigured moments, and I really want to talk about this building aspect. The sermon title I give is helpful. It is a reflection on an impulsive Peter who says, "It is good for us to be here. Let us build 3 tabernacles." The writer gives us some commentary on why Peter says that, because it comes out of the blue. He said that because he didn't know what else to say, because Peter, James, and John were scared to death. I wonder, as we talk about the Jesus who appears before us and the Jesus that we know, I wonder if that scene happened to us, what we would do. Some of us, Peter is like many of us who just can't stand the silence when something strange is going on. And so he says what he says because he was afraid and he did not know what to say. So on this Graduates Recognition Sunday, I want to focus on these words of Peter. And I want to ask each of you who have graduated a question. What are you building? I want this graduation, they call this in schools, they call it a commencement, which means it is a beginning and not an ending. I pray that this graduation for you inspires you to build. And yes, Vernon Johns was right. All of us need, in the world in which we live, some transfigured moments. We need some things that make us stop and go, wow, and say yes, and get all bubbly inside, and have our nerves and all that we've done swollen to think about the joy of the power of that moment, and that we get caught up in this euphoria in the height of that moment. But I want to tell you, dear friends, every graduation is not an end, it is a beginning. So what are you building? I first want to say about Peter. Peter says, let's build 3 tabernacles, let's build 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Elijah, one for Moses. For everyone who is faced with an achievement, I don't want you to fall in the trap of doing too much. Now, I want to be clear. I am not asking you to do nothing. When you have an achievement, you ought to do something with it, right? But so many times I want you to know that we are never at our most vulnerable point than when we check a box on something that we set as a goal and now it's done. You are vulnerable now because now you're looking back as opposed to looking ahead. The truth of the matter is that some people have an accomplishment and then sit down. It is not enough to just be overtaken by the euphoria of a grand moment. And we salute you, every one of you. But this is not the time for you to be paralyzed. It is not the time for you to bottle up that moment with pictures and selfies, to have a very big party and then nothing else. This is equally damnable. Great experiences, once-in-a-lifetime opportunities like the Transfiguration ought to make us want to do something. Transfiguration of Jesus ought to move us to think about our own transformation as a result. As Vernon John said in his sermon, this is the only quote I'm going to give you from that sermon. I thank God for the resistance because it is a great sermon. We are so often paying attention to motion that we forget direction. Some of us, as the young people say, we are doing the most. We have something and then we want to supersede it. We want it to be more than perhaps what we deserve, more than certainly what we can afford. We want more than our capacity to do. Here is Peter saying, hey, let's build 3 tents. The truth of the matter is, sometimes after achievement, we just get so busy in the frenetic energy of accomplishment that we forget there is still more work to be done. And every time, let me explain school to you very simply. In the earliest parts of school, you learn the basics of reading and writing, arithmetic. You get those basics down as a foundation, and then you start to explore as you grow up. Science, math, history, different disciplines. Now, everybody who loves math isn't going to love history, and everyone who loves history is not going to necessarily love math. But every time you advance in school, what you are doing, you are narrowing your focus. It's not just motion, it's direction. It's focus. It's a way of saying, let me tell you about a person that gets a doctoral degree. A person who gets a doctoral degree, you know what that means? They know a whole lot about one little piece of information. Doesn't mean that all of a sudden with a doctor of theology, I'm going to go out and get an economics award. It does not mean because it is the focus. And what we need right now is not people who are all over the place, firing everything, doing everything. I had a student once who had come into the Theo school with a doctorate already, decided that they, notice my pronouns so you can't figure out gender, decided that they wanted to get a degree in theology. So started in the master's program, and after the first Bible class, came to me and said, I want to get a PhD in Bible. Now, you already got a PhD. Now you want a PhD in Bible? Tell me something. And this person was less than 35 years old. And I said, what's the rush? Some of us are so busy collecting achievements so that we can be credentialed. But let me tell you something, dear friends. I know people who have terminal degrees, meaning doctorates, who also have terminal ignorance. Don't try to do it all. Focus. Second thing I want to say to you is, you need another reason to find your voice besides fear. Now, in this text, the writer tells us that Peter says, let us build, because he was uncomfortable with the terrible, awesome sight of seeing what was happening to Jesus in his own eyes. But the truth of the matter is, every time we get to one of these defining moments in our life, it is not just filled with joy, it is also filled with fear. If you're going to another school, some of you were in preschool or in elementary school, going to middle school, going to high school, going to college. There you are in the fear of starting all over. Will I have friends when I get there? What happens to the people? What about my favorite teachers and my subject matters? Am I going to be able to do it? Can I make friends? Are there going to be there people who will bully me because of who I am and what I say? The fear of taking on unknown subjects. I can do math, but boy, they're talking about trigonometry and calculus. What is that? Those of you who have graduated from college, you have the fear of now the real world. Let me tell you something. You might have been in college. If you got the bills paid, if you got your tuition done, you need to thank God. But you know, dear friends, that you were participating in the real world in a controlled environment. But so many young people are worried. What's the point of a college degree now? Where can I get a job? Do I have to go? Let me say, too, everybody who graduates from high school does not have to go to college. Some do have to go. There are others. There are other jobs and places now and vocations where a college degree is not necessary. We need some folks. We don't need to be choosing between folks who go to college and folks who don't. We want both segments of our young people to be employable with some insurance and some benefits. You don't have to speak just because you're afraid of the silence. Sometimes, dear friend, you got to be still and know that God is God. Sometimes you don't have to rush into a decision. You need to sit down and talk to God about it. Figure out what you want to do. Don't be afraid of the pauses. Nobody interviewed you for the job. No graduate school will let you in. Nobody has done anything, but you need to take advantage of the pauses, the silent times, the unknown. That's where God meets you and brings you to new discoveries. Sometimes God can't get your attention because we are too busy meeting all the assignments. Sometimes when the assignments are done and there's not another thing on our list to do, that's the time that God speaks. I'm thinking today of the great jazz musician Thelonious Monk, who said that the music is not in the notes, it is in the pauses, in the silence. Amen. Sometimes God is trying to speak to you in the silence. Don't get excited. Somebody has a school that's been looking for you. You just got to find it. Somebody has a job that you could do. You just got to find it. Somebody has something for you to do. You just have to find it. Don't you rest until you find it. You don't have to just start talking big just because you're scared. The third thing, and I'm gone now. When Peter shut up, the cloud came over him. Somebody say, don't be afraid of all the clouds. And out of that cloud came this voice, this is my son, the beloved, listen to him. I want to say to you, dear friends, that's not the first time we heard that in Jesus. It was said at his baptism. I want to tell you something even more spectacular, good news, that idea of being God's child does not belong to Jesus alone. Listen to me what I'm going to say. That affirmation that God gives of Jesus right now in this text is not a one and done. You, every one of you graduates, you are God's child right now. And in this instance, in this one thing, in this one accomplishment, God is pleased with you. I charge you to go into the world and make God proud and pleased. Go into the world and do something big, because you didn't do too much. You got to focus. You didn't just speak because you were afraid, but you trusted in waiting to hear the voice of God said, I am pleased with you. Well, I thought that I would get each of you a present today. I really wanted to. I had something particular in mind. I was going to get a bag of Legos and tell you, go into the world and build something. I was going to tell you to imagine something in your mind, something that inspires you, there's something that you want to see in the world, and then take it and shape your own blocks into that. I didn't get those Legos for two reasons. That now that marketing has gotten involved with Lego, you can't buy a kit of Lego without a model, a prescribed something that they want you to build. Listen carefully. Star Wars and Batman and rockets and cars. They have a picture of what they want you to build with their things. And for me, dear friends, that's a problem. It chokes out your imagination. The Legos are flawed. They are spending money, and they are spending money promoting other people's products, where there might be something inside of you that Batman and Star Wars and cars and trucks haven't seen. And that if I just say build, you would be preconditioned. You would feel compelled to build what they think you should build. Listen what I'm about to say. Whatever you build, don't be pulled by the market to build what the market thinks you should build. Commercial ideas and brand marketing for such things as superheroes flood the market. It's hard to build the thing you want when Lego keeps telling you to build what they have conceived for you. The other thing that hit me is to recognize that you have made your accomplishments today. And if I ask you to build or create something, that each and every one of you is a unique expression of God's creativity in the world. I might give you a bag of blocks, but that may not be the way you learn or express yourself. The fact is that your freedom, blocks might cover you in, but if I give you a musical instrument, you might find some new notes, huh? If I gave you a pen and a piece of paper, you might write a story. If I gave you a microscope, you might get curious about the way cells move, and you might find something that nobody else sees. You see, you can't expect everybody to build with blocks because some people don't build with blocks. Blocks are a limitation. So I'm going to tell you, I want you to build with whatever you use that gives you joy and makes you find passion. I want you to use your voice. If you like to put your voice into the air and give great thoughts or great notes for music, if you use your hands to sit down, maybe even with a penknife and whittle on a piece of wood or a hammer and a chisel and turn and block out something that nobody has seen from a rock that you had, or somebody who has the patience with dirt, turn it into clay, spin it around, and put their hands on it in such a way that it might be a vase today, a cup tomorrow, or something else. I want you to build something. And if nobody else is clear about it, here is your assignment from the pastor. If nobody else is clear about it, doesn't believe in it, doesn't want to see it done, you keep building until God says no. You can do it. You already have what it takes. You've already shown me, because you've checked off some boxes already, but now I want you to use your hands to the glory of God. Your own two hands. You don't need to borrow from somebody else's thought. You don't need to do it. You need to understand that every one of us is a part of a connective network, an ecology of people who share ideas with us, but those ideas get into your system and they are just for you. And they are for you to be a creative activity in the world. What are you building? The world needs you. Because we're in a culture now that doesn't do anything but tear stuff up. We're tearing up the world to find oil and gas. We're tearing up other people's boundaries in order to show our power. We're tearing up each other's reputation as we spew venom across the aisles of people who are not like us. We need some builders right now. We need some folks who can build bridges, some folks who can build music and poetry and stories that cause us to think differently, to hear differently, to find our harmonies, get on our notes and sing. We need people who could paint art that can show us a different way of understanding the human condition. We need you, not to build like the developers in Brooklyn. Every place there's a hole, they put something in it. And the truth of the matter is, dear friends, ain't nobody buying those places because nobody can afford it. And the truth of the matter is, I'm going to go further, the developers don't care if you move in there or not because they've already made their money in the development. I'm going to start fussing in a minute. What are you building, my friends? It's in you. Come on, gentlemen. And you can find it. We're in C. Y'all took a break on me? I can change the world with my own two hands, make it a better place with my own two hands. make it a kind of place with my own two hands, with my own two hands, with my own two hands. I can make peace on earth with my own two hands. I can clean up the earth with my own two, and I can reach out to you with my own two hands, with my own two hands, with my own two hands. Now, I want every graduate, whether you graduated from kindergarten, college, and college, I want you to just stop and look at your own hands. I want you to see that the fate of the world is right there in your hands. All the mamas and the papas that have gotten you to this point now, you're going to have to turn to your own thing and dig down for the thing that God has for you. And if you stood in somebody else's place, I want you to look at your hands and see, with your own two hands, you have the power